Good? Okay, good afternoon. Hello. I am Jennifer Murley. I'm the CEO of the Grey Highlands Public Library, and I will be your MC this afternoon. We are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the three first known as Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Niashingaming, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land, and recognize the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. There are 2 wheelchair-accessible washrooms located at the entrance of the hall. There are more washrooms down the stairs near the entrance where you came in. If you do not require an accessible washroom, we ask that you please make use of these facilities. In the case of an emergency, there are exits at the back of the sanctuary on both sides, in addition to the entrance where you came in. We will be collecting donations for the church. If you're able to donate, no matter how big or small, you'll be supporting the team here in their mission to provide a fun-packed, regular schedule of community events. With all that said, let's get started. There's no end to the writing talent in Grey County. The Winter Bookfest is testament to that. At today's event, we are featuring 15 local authors. Please browse through their works in Fellowship Hall. On your way back to the sanctuary, grab a baked treat, coffee, or tea from Susan's Deli, and settle in for some literary readings here. Now I will introduce our musical guest. With an evocative voice that captivates her audience, Paige Warner creates music that sits between R&B and singer-songwriter with soul-inspired vocal licks layered on catchy hooks and rhythms. With over 59,000 combined listens on Spotify alone, Paige's recent singles have drawn love from media and listeners alike. She is skilled with more than just her voice, regularly accompanying herself with piano, guitar, or inviting her backup band to the stage. Please welcome Paige Warner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Turn your gaze away.
so much.
Thank you, Paige. Next up, we have Elizabeth Glenn Copeland, who is an author, theater artist, and arts educator whose work over the past 40-plus years has evolved at the intersection of arts and activism. As a theater artist, she has toured with Second City doing improv comedy, played the witch in Hansel and Gretel with Honolulu Symphony, and told her stories at the Toronto International Storytelling Festival. Her arts education credits include work with Learning Through the Arts, World Vision, and the Storytellers School of Toronto. Her latest book is a book of narrative eco-poetry, Daring to Hope at the Cliff's Edge, Pangea's Dream Remembered. Please welcome Elizabeth to the stage.
Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer. Isn't Jennifer just one of the loveliest people you could ever hope to meet? Yay. So, can you all hear me well? Yep. How's that? So my husband is immunocompromised, so I have to be super duper careful, hence the mask, which I'm now going to ask to be surrounded by a bubble of angelic forces so that I do not inhale anything that I can take home to my sweetheart. So I have long been, well, how should I describe this? I have long been a fan, I have long had a passion for communicating with the animate world that began in childhood high up in the arms of an old weeping willow. Though we did not communicate with words, her wise counsel and abiding love saw me through difficult times that I don't believe I would have otherwise survived. So fast forward almost 60 years, when I was offered a writing residency at the Joggins Fossil Institute, a UNESCO World Heritage Site on the mighty Bay of Fundy. And I jumped at the chance to communicate, to enter into a communication with 300 million-year-old rock. I took to this rock an entire bowel of eco-despair. And I went to the rock to ask, how do we move forward in these times? What part am I meant to play in these difficult times in which we find ourselves? So began an incredible odyssey that took me down into the dungeon of my own eco-despair and forced me to examine what it really means to practice what Buddhist eco-philosopher Joanna Macy refers to as active hope. So I'm going to share two things from this book today. And just so you know, this book is available at the Grey Highlands Public Library, as is my other book, Jazz. And if you take the book out, I get a little bit of money from the public lending right. So if you can do that for me, I would very much appreciate it. I was going to start with another piece, but then I saw that there are some children here. So I wanted to start with a little bit of a story that is in part 2 of this book, and it's called The Language of the Birds. And it goes like this. The language of the birds was considered a secret and perfect language in many alchemical traditions, though history has hidden the names of many of those who paid the price required to learn this magical tongue. Some of their stories were hidden away in the folds of fairy tales, as it is in this rendition of a classic tale from old Russia. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Ivan who had a perfectly unselfish heart. He lived with his older brother Dmitri and his father, a proud and wealthy merchant. One fine spring day, Ivan's father tells the boys to go into the world to make their fortune. The brothers set out, and as night falls, they find themselves walking through a dark forest. Suddenly, Ivan hears a cry of distress. He runs from the path towards the sound and finds at the base of a giant oak a tiny baby bird fallen from its nest. He gently picks up the still blind creature, tucking it into his pocket, then scales to the top of the tree where he returns the baby to his mother's nest. Overcome with gratitude, the mother bird offers to teach Ivan the language of the birds. Spring turns to summer, and Ivan stays in the forest, intent on his learning. Only when the leaves turn from green to orange does he set out for home. Along the way, he meets his brother, who boasts of money and women and the name he made for himself at the gambling tables. Dmitri's face contorts into a sneer at the news of Ivan's puny exploits. When the brothers arrive home, they proudly recount their stories. The father orders a fine feast to be prepared for his eldest son, then banishes Ivan to the barn. As the moon rises high in the still night, an icy rain begins to fall. Shivering with cold and fear, Ivan hears the barn swallow tell him that all will be well, that one day he will save his brother from execution, rescue his father from poverty, marry a clever princess, and become a wise and benevolent king. Ivan's stories has many twists and turns, replete with high adventure involving pirates and talking crows, and I encourage you to read it in its entirety. But the upshot of the story is this. When faced with trials, Ivan calls on his bird friends and thus saves himself and many others from great suffering. The language of the birds was considered a secret and perfect language in many alchemical traditions. It was also known as the green language. So I'm jumping ahead till the end of the book. If you want to know more, you have to go to the library and take it out. Invocation. O great dreamer, who art our eternal mother, hallowed be thy flame. Thy rapture come, thy songs be sung in joy at thy simple wonder. Give us this day our daily breath, and forgive us our hubris as we forgive that which makes us complicit. And lead us not into further benumbment, but deliver us from extinction. For thine is the history, the mystery, and the morrow, forever and ever and ever. And so it is, and so it is, and so it is. I'm going to take my last few minutes just to share a little bit from a new work that I have been putting together over this very isolating winter. It's called Floating on Magma, and just a few excerpts here. It is the dark of the moon in the time of the great unraveling, the year of our Lord's 2023. The lords of conquest are riding high, their silk suits stained with gravy. Downwind, the halls of no knowledge. George Orwell rolling over in his grave. Oceans rising as markets thrive. Politicians lying as species die. Oh, beautiful Gaia, descending into my body to bear witness. An arabesque of scalding anguish. I'll just jump to the end here. 2023 on Eagle's Peak. High up on Eagle's Peak, in perfect presence, they wait in the gathering silence as moon hangs heavy in a violet sky. Below, in the darkening caverns of the river beneath the river, she groans as the birth pangs grow stronger and stronger, and the time of anguish begins. All who have given birth know the lie of masculine philosophies that hold that enlightenment is birthed in sanitary silence, while a chorus of gelded boys wait for the signal to sing their hosannas as the bishop wipes pork grease from his trembling chin. Birth is bloody, messy, with waves of mounting pain that the bishop's unmothered boys could never withstand. In these tilting times, we are called upon to midwife, to descend to the caverns, our medicine bags packed with healing herbs, fresh water, to staunch blood, wipe fevered brows, offer tea to Mother Death, who patiently waits in the corner as she must. Meanwhile, Gaia, also known as she who has always loved us, thrashes in pain. High up on Eagle's Peak, they wait to see if we will answer their call. The ultimate labor of love is progressing. When the child's head begins to crown, will I be ready? Will we be ready? Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Elizabeth. Next up, we have Kathy Hurd. After running a sheep farm for 30 years, Kathy Hurd now lives in the woods on the shores of Georgian Bay. She works as a United Church minister in northern Georgian Bluffs. Kathy weaves tapestries and scarves, and she tells stories that draw together the threads of modern questions and ancient myth. Kathy has published novels, stories, and poems. She writes a weekly spirituality column for the online news magazine owensoundhub.org. She is an avid reader who loves to discover new authors and the worlds they build. Along with her first 2 novels set in ancient Greece, Kathy has also written a contemporary fantasy trilogy that draws on Celtic mythology and Arthurian legends. Please join me as I welcome Kathy Hurd to the stage.
Well, having done mythology and fantasy for a while, I switched with my latest book, Unseen, which came out 2 weeks ago, so it's brand new. It's published with I finally got an Ontario publisher, Brainlag Books, and it's Toronto 2052. You wouldn't recognize the city. The parks are all gone. Just one little section of High Park is left, and there's an infestation of insects threatening those trees. The city is run by a massive super AI called Monitor. Don't touch the wheel of any car. They're all driven by AIs. But there's also a group of people who are gifted, one of them gifted with connection to birds. We just heard about the language of birds. You're going to hear a bit about Ricky, whose connection is to plants. Some of them have a psychic empathy ability. So the gifted are also very much involved in this story. So it's kind of magic and technology both. It opens like this. Attention. Human intervention required, said Monitor in its hollow, non-gendered voice. An alarm blared. Attention. Human intervention required. Jen focused her dark brown eyes on the map of Toronto's core where a flashing red dot showed a traffic snarl. She stretched her long legs and stood to approach the map. The user interface glove on her left hand brought the location into view. What kind of intervention, Monitor? She asked, running her fingers through her short cropped brown hair. Traffic halted. Attention, human intervention required. What do you think is the problem? Asked Raja, one of the other traffic overseers on duty. Attention, human intervention required. We'll soon see. Jen moved her fingers to mute Monitor's voice. The system that oversaw traffic and so many other infrastructure processes in the city always seemed a little annoyed when it needed to demand a person step in and fix things. Most traffic problems Monitor could solve on its own with minor adjustments to stoplight timing or by instructing the AI pilots to take an alternate route. In this case, the map showed that both lanes of westbound traffic on Dundas had stopped, dead, at Kensington, while eastbound traffic moved just fine. Jen shifted to an access terminal and typed in the address to pull up the view from the overhead traffic cam. Nothing seemed to be on the road in front of the first of the stopped cars. Monitor, turn on the sound from this camera's microphone. A car horn blared. The passenger seated in the third car back had reached over to hold the horn down. Fool. The auto car ahead of him wasn't going to pay attention to a horn. Jen frowned at the screen. The stoppage made no sense. Zooming in the surveillance cam, she got the license number from the plate attached to the roof of the first stopped car. She typed in the code that would query the AI's pilot. A message came back instantly. Pedestrian crossing. Is someone standing in the road? Raja got up and studied the map. Not that I can see. Was somebody lying on the road? But the car claimed a person was crossing. And if the bumper cam saw a person on the ground, the pilot would have summoned police and paramedics. Though it didn't make sense, she could not override the car's decision from a distance if a pedestrian was involved. I'll go. She stripped off the user interface glove and grabbed her bike helmet and the backpack with her toolkit. One sec. Raja frowned at the map on the screen. We had trouble in this same location last week. I remember the incident, one of the other two overseers said. Super weird. Jen raised an eyebrow. I read the report. A graffiti painting on the building wall, a person riding a bike. I didn't believe it. I swear, that's all I found. Well, it says pedestrian alert, so I expect to find an invisible person. She headed for the door. Phone, summon an elevator, she said, hurrying down the hall. The doors opened as she arrived. The people inside looked annoyed. Sorry if you weren't going to the ground floor and you're in a hurry, said Jen. Monitor called an emergency. I tried to make sure that I represented the ethnic diversity of Toronto. So Ricky, who has the connection with plants, his gift is a green thumb. He's a Korean Canadian in background. And, well, he suffers with the destruction of the parks. Phone, said Ricky, tell callers I'm away. It was 11:45, and he was headed for the subway and Koreatown, a trip that would take him past what had been Christie Pits. He remembered rows of ash trees, a towering elm, lots of pine, gardens flaming with flowers, the real grass on the ball diamond and soccer field. When the area was given over to a developer, the city insisted that a public pool be included in one building and a shortened soccer field with artificial grass in the other. Between the high-rises, 5 maples remained, surrounded by concrete. Twice in one day, Ricky thought, I have to deal with my memory of green growing spaces that were. His chest ached. He has the subway trip, gets to the Christie Pits subway stop, and comes out. Waiting for a green light with his back to what had been the park, Ricky stared straight ahead while traffic hurried past. The light turned, and he crossed the road, heading south to the storefront he knew well. When he opened the door, he breathed in the complicated smell of herbs, spices, and traditional medicines sold here, one store that had remained in this neighborhood, while the rest of the Koreans have moved to Mississauga. The woman behind the counter smiled at him. Rayung, so seldom you visit. Busy, I am sure. It's good to see you. He slipped into Korean culture mode with a jolt. This always happened when somebody called him by his given name. My mother, Mayayoma, sends greetings. Auntie Chinsun also. Carry my good wishes with you when you go to visit. The woman tapped the counter. Now, did your Ayoma send you for herbs? I can look what she bought for your father on her last visit. Or is it Hal Abioji, grandfather, that you seek? Father is well. I have a question for your Hal Abioji. He's almost your grandfather, too, the way he relishes your visits. He's in the backyard, of course. Thanks. Ricky knew that grandfather's garden was what kept this family from moving west with the rest of the community. The established shrubs and perennials would be hard to move. Ricky made his way down one of the narrow corridors of the store, past rows of drawers, counters with stacks of boxes, and the center rack loaded with packets of herbs. Opening the back door, he stepped into a yard with vines climbing up the fences and across the overhead trellis. Wisteria, begonia, petunia, and nasturtium flourished in the baskets that hung from the trellis, while roses grew along one fence and herbs beside the other. Rayung, grandfather said without looking up. Ricky wondered again if the man was an empath or gifted with a special sense of hearing, but he had once hinted at the question and the man had looked so frightened he never repeated the inquiry. And his skills in gardening were what mattered this day. Ricky knelt beside him, watching him carefully remove volunteer plants, untangling leaves and roots so the herbs were not disturbed and the volunteer could be replanted in a more appropriate place. He rehearsed again the Korean words he had practiced, let them spill into the space between them. Boja, show. The man held out his hand. Gently removing the sealed jar from his pocket, Ricky laid it on the old man's hand. A frown creased the grandfather's forehead as he muttered words Ricky couldn't catch. Grandfather pulled a magnifying glass from his shirt pocket, studied the insects Ricky had collected. The old man glared at him, fire in his eyes. He thrust the jar back into Ricky's hand, speaking with a rush of staccato Korean. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." Ricky caught the word for death and tree, but no more. In halting Korean, he told the old man that the tree had not died yet, but the leaves were suddenly turning brown. The old man stood, backed away, and spoke a rush of words. "Wait." Ricky ran inside to the old man's daughter. "Can you come, please? Grandfather has something to tell me, but I can't understand." "Sure, Rayong, sure." She turned the lock in the front door and followed him to the garden. There grandfather paced, hands interlaced behind his back. "Sit, Abeyoji, sit." She led him to the metal armchair and pressed him to relax. "Now tell me." The old man placed his hands on the arms of the chair and looked up at his daughter with a mouth set in a tense line. Again, words poured out like a rushing river. He closed his fist, raised it, and spat out the last words. His daughter's hands went to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "Yes." Grandfather turned to Ricky. "Tell him." "My father says that these are not real. No such insect exists. He is furious that such a monster lives in this city. How did you get them?" Ricky swallowed. How do I explain that? They had some birds give them a hand clearing out these insects in High Park. "We found them on some stressed trees in High Park." The shopkeeper translated for her father, who nodded vigorously, pointing sharply with his forefinger at the jar in Ricky's hands. "Father says these will make the trees sick, and any bird that tried to eat it. They are so foreign, nothing can stop them." "If they're a hybrid, they may not be able to reproduce," said Ricky. "Does he think they are an intentional cross or biosynthetic?" His daughter struggled to find the words to translate Ricky's question. When she did, the old man threw up his hands, declaring in words that Ricky understood all too well that he was not the one who could answer that question. The old man waved him away. "Kill them." Then with an angry scowl, the old man insisted Ricky never bring such an abomination to him again. Ricky stood. "Gamsa habnoda, thank you, and I won't offend you by bringing such a thing again." "Good," the old man muttered under his breath, wondering what the world was coming to, and told Ricky to make sure to capture all of the horrible creatures. "That's the plan," said Ricky. So you get a little peek at the technology and a peek at least one of the gifted. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Next up, we have John Butler, a retired health service planner. He's worked at the Queen Street Mental Health Center and at the Ministry of Health as the Executive Director, Association of District Health Councils of Ontario. Today, he serves on Grey Highlands committees for climate action, peace, the Friends of the Flesherton Library, and Grey County Cares. John has collected Frederick G's newspaper accounts of his life as a resident at the House of Refuge in Markdale. Built in 1904, previously standing where Grey Gables is now located, the facility provided a residence for the poor and destitute. His book, House of Refuge, Grey County's Home for Poor, Old, and Friendless Folk, provides an insider's look at the comings and goings, staff, and conditions in what was quite a modern building of its time. Please welcome John Butler to the stage.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. My name is John Butler. In 1904, after 2 decades of wrangling, Grey County opened its House of Refuge in Markdale, the precursor to Grey Gables. It was an imposing building situated on a 50-acre farm worked by the inmates of the home. Its 8th admitted inmate was Frederick G., an impoverished former British Army schoolmaster and failed farmer who had lost the ability to walk. For the next 4 years, Frederick G. wrote weekly columns for the newspapers in Flesherton and Markdale, chronicling the goings-on in the House of Refuge. These are a unique insight into the workings of an early 20th century social institution. My book, House of Refuge, is a collection of many of his columns and much about the early history of the House of Refuge. The Flesherton Advance published his obituary on June 4th, 1908. It said, Frederick G., who for so many years charmingly interested the readers of this paper in the Crimean campaign and later acted as special correspondent for the House of Refuge, passed away at that institution on Sunday after almost a lifetime of pain, his infirmity rendering it impossible to do physical labor. On October 12, 1905, in this paper, Mr. G. wrote, on July 11, 1904, I was received in the House of Refuge, and in the House of Refuge I expect to die. Sic est vitae. This is how a newspaper of the time described the 26 or so houses of refuge in Ontario. December 7th, 1905, Flesherton Advance. There seems to be a lack of information among municipal authorities as to whom may be committed to any house of refuge. Section 526 of the Consolidated Municipal Act gives the classes that may be committed. They are, number one, all poor and indigent persons who are incapable of supporting themselves. Two, all persons without means of maintaining themselves and able of body to work, and who refuse or neglect to do so. Number three, all persons leading a vagrant life and exercising no ordinary calling or lawful business sufficient to procure an honest living. Four, all such as spend their time and property in public houses to the neglect of any lawful calling. And number five, idiots. Frederick G. was an affable man, but a man who believed in rules. Sometimes his columns seemed less than friendly to his fellow inmates. On August 19th, 1906, he wrote in his column, inmates who can earn their livelihood during the summer months are justified in leaving and deserve credit for doing so, even if from inability to continue doing so through the winter months are forced to return to the home. It is sheer folly, however, for inmates who know perfectly well that they are unable to support themselves by their labor and who have no friends to care for them, to insist on leaving the home, knowing that they are only increasing the burden of the ratepayers. Such ones should be consigned to the home for the remainder of their life and a day extra in order that they may cool off before it being laid away for keeps. Fred G. also had an eye for the foibles of his fellow inmates, as witnessed by this report of a conversation between two of them. Mr. S. loudly, what is that minister's name that was here this afternoon? O.C. moderately, Mr. Hurlbert. O.C. louder. Mr. what? Hurlbert. Mr. S. vociferously, I could understand you better if you wouldn't speak so loud. How do you spell it? O.C., twice as loud and close to S.'s ear, H-U-R-L-B-U-R-T. Mr. S., I see, Alcorn. I don't think I know him. He's a fine young man, though, and a good speaker. Do you think we can get him to come again? And he wrote this about a gift from the son of the manager of the home. Mr. Harry Harness has purchased a Columbia graphophone, with which he treats the inmates to occasional band concerts, songs, sentimental and comic, hymns, ancient and modern, stump orations, etc. And poor old Archie, notwithstanding deafness, appears very timorous when seated in front of the machine, fearing perhaps that the open-mouthed blunderbuss may burst forth a charge of grape and canister at any moment in mistake for a duet. One local newspaper editor also weighed in on the habits of those in the House of Refuge. August 17, 1905, Flesherton Advance. An old lady has been sent to jail from the House of Refuge as insane because she pulled the manager's whiskers. We suppose there are plenty of women in this country who will question the validity of the evidence as to the woman's insanity. By these, hair and whisker pulling is looked upon as a harmless pastime, and they would object strongly to being incarcerated as lunatics. In fact, almost every county would require an asylum as well as a house of refuge if a woman's standard of mental strength were gauged according to her in or disinclination to pull whiskers. Fred G's columns were also a passionate call for justice for those he lived with. December 7th, 1905, Archie Larkart, who at his own request was discharged in September, was readmitted on Saturday. It is small wonder that the old fellow should say there is no place like home when people are to be found unscrupulous enough to take all the work they can out of a homeless and friendless old man, and then, when they find they can dispense with his services, turn him adrift at this inclement season. Such appears to have been the case with Archie. On leaving the institution, the old fellow engaged with a farmer in the neighborhood of Chatsworth to attend stock and chore around. But it appears no definite arrangement had been made as to wages, other than that the man would pay him whatever he was worth. The stock was large and the chores considerable, and he was kept busy from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m., working days and Sundays. Last week, he was told that he was wanted no longer, turned adrift, and instead of being remunerated, the unprincipled employer kept the old fellow's watch and some other articles and had the audacity to hand him an anonymous letter to the manager of this institution requesting him to be good to the poor. Such cheek. Archie says he was badly fed and badly treated all the time he was there. His appearance when he arrived here was a voucher for the truth of his assertion. Archie was the first inmate admitted to the home, being admitted on opening day, June 23rd, 1904. He is still rugged and able to take a fairly good man's place in the field, the barnyard, or stable. His only infirmity is extreme deafness. And on January 25th, 1906, Fred G. wrote, "On Friday last, it was a sad spectacle to see a man bring his only sister to a house of refuge. Had the man been a poor man with a large family to support, the circumstances would have been less conspicuous. On the contrary, he is a man possessed of 150 acres, a substantial and roomy house, with a wife and only one child, and reputed bank account, if not very large, still a bank account worth having. The girl is about 50 years of age, and although somewhat feeble, still is no trouble. She had no idea that he was going to bring her here, and feels keenly her position, not so much from being in the home as from the deceitful manner in which she was brought by her own brother." No doubt, in fact, it is quite certain that she will be better treated here than in a home with a brother devoid of brotherly affections for an only sister. What shines through is Fred G's own personal compassion in his columns. In July 5th, 1906, he wrote, "After a lapse of 2 months, the Grim Reaper death claimed Martin Dunn, an estimable comrade who passed peacefully away to the vast unknown about 9:00 a.m. on Tuesday. He was 66 years old. From the first, it was evident that his earthly carrier was drawing fast toward its close, being afflicted with a constant lung-devouring cough. Patience and inoffensiveness were noble characteristics of his nature. Whenever asked how he felt, his invariable answer was, 'Not so bad at all, thank God. It might be a great deal worse for me.' While here, he was never known to give the slightest offense to anyone, either by word or deed. During the last 3 or 4 weeks of his life, I was the constant companion at his bedside, giving him help and such consolation as he was able to take. And it was sad to see his once healthy, vigorous, and manly form now lying a wasted skeleton. While bending over him in his last moments, he opened his eyes. His speech had left him the previous night. He gazed earnestly and affectionately into my face. Those glassy eyes seemed to say goodbye, simultaneous with the last breath that separated his soul from its earthly tenement of clay. I closed his eyes and spent a few reverent moments alone with the remains before making known his death to his late comrades." But Fred G. was also not shy about giving advice to his fellow inmates. On July 12, 1906, he wrote, "We understand that one of the inmates applied to the committee to leave the institution for the summer months. On being asked, 'What could you do for a living? Were you allowed to go?' 'Oh, I could hoe potatoes and turnips,' he answered. 'Well, there seems to be plenty of that kind of work to be done here. You better remain,' said the committee. Had he said he could split rails, peel posts, and telephone poles by the thousand, take out ship knees, etc., he may have received a more favorable reply. Think before you answer next time, comrade. Fred G. is a man I never met, but for the rest of my life, he will be my friend. Thank you for listening to Fred G.
That was John Butler, everyone. Thank you, John. Our next author is Jennifer Frankham, who lives with her husband, 2 daughters, and 2 cats in a home with hundreds of books and much art. She is a retired teacher who taught secondary school in Port Elgin for 25 years. Her poetry has previously appeared in such journals as Prism and the York Pioneer, and in collections from the Brucedale Press, Strong in My Skin, and Dance More Often. Inspired by her daughter Natasha, Jennifer's first book for children, Now That You Are Too, is available from the Brucedale Press. She is also the poetry editor of The Leaf. Please welcome Jennifer Frankham to the stage.
I have my books to protect me and my poetry. Okay, I'm not going to read everything. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. I'm not going to read everything, but I'm prepared. I was a teacher after all. I'm going to start with something about teaching because it consumes my days still and nights, nightmares, and night dreams. So it never leaves. This is called Grade 12 English, a unit of poetry. There would be monstrous groans at the beginning, which threatened to defeat me, undo my buoyant joy. And then I leapt into action, pricked curiosity, enlivened drowsy thoughts of Friday afternoon or Monday morning, alerted teens to wonders of spring, the pyramids, and dreams. Talk of love and lust, and a brief comparison, which perked their ears like attentive rabbits. They grinned then and asked me things we pondered together. What is the difference between like and love? One young boy asked. And there was a pause so pregnant, I knew I'd hooked the most of them, as all silent awaited my reply. And I, 25, fed the question back to them as pablum on a tiny spoon, as we examined small portions meted out of a question which keeps us generating generations, our love getting the better of us if we have sense enough to love. And then my students took up their pens, looked into the distance briefly, and wrote to the ancient and holy tune of their beating hearts. So it's been a long COVID, and we need some leavening sometimes. The church where we were married has lost the record book to prove our union 27 years ago. My once wed husband yells, "I'm free," with glee and a merry glint in his eyes. And I tell him maybe Angelina Jolie would fancy him and his wonderful cooking for her half-dozen children. She is through with Brad, I think, so why not give her a ring? Woo her with homemade bread, manicotti from scratch, and butter tarts like the ones he made way back when in our courting days. But that was long ago, as the old song goes. Time moves a pretty pace, and at my present age my face has lost the bloom of youth that Angie still possesses. But this I will say, his new flame will not hold a candle to me in the laundry room. She may not turn his stinky socks right side out, nor spray with care soiled garments, so he should beware. And as he watches clothes churn in the sudsy portal, he may think fondly of me then. I who was once his lovely laundress, adept with resolve and tide and bounce, now a fading memory in a cobwebbed corner of his mind. So I've had a number of poems published in a local newspaper in Paisley, the Paisley Advocate, where after I retired, I started proofreading, but it's all proofreading online, and it's very hard on the eyes. So I only did that for a year. But I've been writing, getting things published there almost every month for the last couple of years. So it's something to work towards, sending things out there. And this is about a former teacher friend who I taught special ed with, and she's still teaching, and she has ducks. So this is about her ducks. Tamara and Jacqueline and I watched the stars of afternoon. A clutch of ducks, both white and regal, clustered at the sprinkler beneath a rainbow spray. They pecked for bugs and chatted, proud, serene, as most had laid an egg that morn, both rich and creamy, great for baking. One spread her feathery wings and raised herself on wide webbed feet. I took it as a sign she was a major player in the egg-laying business. and my next plate of scrambled, poached, or fried was thanks to her. She nodded sagely in the way of laying ducks, a sly smile on her beak. Her thoughts turned inward then, a faraway look in her beady eyes, the fact of her creation of a smooth white oblong moon, a mystery to the thinking mind. And as for which came first, the duck or egg, I do not give a toss. As long as eggs keep being laid, continue sliding off a skillet onto my waiting plate. Over easy, not overdone. Toast soldiers at attention, waiting to be dipped in double yolks, the color of the sun. Each morning I read. Each morning I read the splash of milk in the foam of my coffee, as some read tea leaves. It is always a good omen that there is coffee, milk, a cup, fresh water from my faucet, a machine to brew, electricity too. What else? A safe home, peace without and within. A cat washing herself, even behind the ears. A maple beginning to unfurl her mapped hands, which tell news too. There are wonders still. A bird perches for a moment, then soars. Small things are miraculous. The quick sperm, a healthy egg. Children singing as they play. The songs can comfort me forever. The same stars. My father studied anthropology, Australopithecus, Cro-Magnon man, cave dwellers. He told me the word bonfire meant bone fire, a pyre of bones in flame. We walked at night together, looked in awe at the stars the cave dwellers saw, the stars Magellan used to navigate, the stars that told stories. My father asked me, "How do you think the universe began? Do you believe in God? What happens when we die?" Now I hear him clearly. I am sorry. I never meant to hurt you. When your mom died, I died too. Please forgive me. I have forgiven you many times, Dad. You were the star in my childhood sky. You shine still in my flesh and bones. Your light, my spirit. I have got a couple of poems published in England now, which is quite a nice thing to do. And this is one about the snow belt. So this is from the northwest Merseyside. I don't know that part of England, but northwest side. Snow belt. There is the promise of freezing rain, and I hope to Goddess it is fulfilled. Nothing pumps my adrenaline like the prospect of days inside, listening to handfuls of uncooked rice pelted on windows by phantom wedding guests. This storm we may recall years from now, tell our grandchildren roads were closed for a week. We skated to the store for a bag of milk, a loaf of bread, bought only one of each as supplies dwindled on the shelves, and we were mindful of our neighbors. We will remember the excitement of survival, our welcome home exclaimed upon as if we had been gone for weeks, our return uncertain, frosty eyebrows aging us prematurely and worth a remark. Perhaps there would be a treat, a sweet or better chips and onion dip, a special day indeed. We could munch through evening, gnashing our teeth with the abundant edginess of confinement. The wedding party throwing handfuls of rice, one for every wedding that has ever been. And one more. If God is anywhere, he is in a garden among peonies. God is also in a forest of spruce and birch. She rests beside a stream. She bathes in the river. God is in the ocean, in the belly of the whale. They are the rib cage and digestive organs. God is in the eye of the farmer, in his combine, watching the horizon, his ancestors singing, bringing in the sheaves in marrow memory. God is in the cells. He runs through veins and arteries. God is in the barn where Holsteins are breathing. God is at the hearth where a woman makes toast, saying, as she has said for years, take it to the stove and burn it. Take it to the sink and scrape it. God is around the table with or without grace. God is in the armchair, figuring gains and losses, planning crop rotations. God is in the discs of the harrow, making ready. God likes to be mysterious, a bit of a trickster. God plays a cameo in your dream of plenty. He is in the doorway. She is in the next room. I am not much of a believer, mostly an agnostic. This too is good and somewhat reverent. God has plenty in his backpack as he treks through the desert. Nothing stops her. They are eternity moving through us in disguise.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next speaker is Kate Russell, a writer and communications professional, creative administrator, project development, and strategic planning consultant. Through her business, Girl with Carrot Marching, she offers grant authoring and creative consulting services for unique cultural and diverse community development projects. In her crazy alter ego as philosopher, poet, and theurgic practitioner, Kate E. Fate, Miss Russell exposes her wilder side. Please welcome Kate Russell to the stage.
Do I have Tim Riley to thank for that bio? Thanks, Tim. So last August, published with Ginger Press and Owen Sound, a poetry book. So I was going to read a long one about Grey County, but then I thought, you know what? I'm going to give them a sample of my alter ego, which is that philosopher poet. Thank you, everybody, for this great day. I thought there was going to be a piano interlude before me, so. Okay, this one's called Astronaut Monkeys. We are the astronaut monkeys, endure leaps and plateaus, ride rockets of moments, wake up one morning, build pyramids to the sun. Aliens inbred with primates, life evolved naturally by itself. Before then, there was mystery. There was mystery before then. Fathom fire to cook food, then carve monuments, an evolutionary progress, no phases between hunting and gathering, then the ziggurats. Arisen up to what? There was mystery before mystery there was. Survive the flood sphinx, write your symbolic record of the antediluvian society predating our humanity. Listen to ancestors speak. In clay and silent stone walls, we cannot prove civilization. It came from the mystery before, from before the mystery. It came. Who seeded mankind's mind, dig in desert sandbox to know, scour grid points to seek, planets like Earth out there? Explain our ignorance to me. We learn, adapt, but do not grow, littered with mistaken history. There is inside mystery outside. Outside, there is mystery inside. Ignore crazy conspiracies. The Dogons and Zechariah had knowledge confused in their filters of absorption. By the way, monkey lovers, our telescopes track stars. We lost so much in dark ages. There was a light of mystery before. Before the light, there was mystery. Sages gifted us mathematics, astronomical omens from the east. Sumerians had it beforehand, the infamous Chaldean alchemy. Babylonian slave mastery, seeded empirical Christians. How did we fall so far from the majestic mystery before the mystery was majestic? Return your right-wing complex. Take it back to the first square. Roll the bones in our ancient game where golden chains link us to seeds piled by distant ancestors. They germinate now in soiled hearts. Close your jaded eyes and hear the mystery from before sings, a song from before the mystery. Connect to its power source, you meek monkey astronauts. Make your pudding proof. Our buried ancestral home from a time before time. Cycle through alpha to omega, learn scattered language between. Before the mystery speaks in silence, silence speaks in the mystery before. Now for something a little bit more intimate to the individual. Lightning dragon. Man is a lightning dragon, electrified bright beast, arisen from primordial dirt to form a thought vessel in the mind of God, where unborn potential pulses toward release, a rhythmic heart beats. Moments of time waves, you need a fishtail keel, a supple dorsal rudder to keep an upright course upon a raucous roll tide through each instant of now, 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 where evanescent glimpses of another ephemeral world glint in prismatic reflection, subtle penumbral shadows in peripheral eye corners as brilliant solar beams stare their searchlight rays into your wandered soul. Illuminate a narrow path up abandoned stairways to vibrate an uneasy ascent heavenward with work to do, forgotten philosophy to utter, to an unsuspicious public who, when awakened, wonder why my portentous words sound similar, familiar, peculiar. They are soothed in deep comfort, in remembrance of a way of being every day better than you were yesterday and the day before. Compassion for the mirror reveals 2 brief glimpses of the dragon, but does ensure the underlying notion, a prophetic truth patiently watches, awaits personal permission clearance to softly land its revelation in the folds of evolutionary expansive minds. So our ambient spirit collector may read messages sent from the void. From our radiant souls to our dim selves, we need only apply perseverant intent, listen closely for honest purpose at hand, provided daily as the task for all to toil, the continual trial of enlightenment. The book is called Hard Truth on a Bright Blue Day, and so is this poem. There is a hard truth heard as watcher peers ancient eyes over me. I just want to connect, be soothed in love, but I know deep down it will never be enough. There is more to life than evident reality, societal dance card. Magical chain exists beyond brick walls, media-stunted minds, propaganda passions, poison us all inside out, feed our futile addictions. We forget our silent oneness in digital tether delusion. We miss it then completely, the hard truth on a bright blue day. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And now we're going to welcome back the lovely Paige Warner for another song. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Paige. Our next speaker is Richard Thomas. Richard Thomas attended school in Delta, BC before moving to Ontario, where he studied broadcasting at Conestoga College in Kitchener. In 1983, he moved from radio station CKPR in Thunder Bay to CFOS in Owen Sound. In 1986, he accepted a position as the regional news correspondent for CKCO Television, a job he held until 1999. Since that time, he has owned and operated Richard Thomas Communications in Owen Sound, where he lives with his wife and his children. A lifelong reader, Richard began writing seriously in 1991. His first novel, Gas Ahead, Willie, was shortlisted for the Crime Writers of Canada Arthur Ellis Award for the best first novel of 1996. He has been awarded the Heritage Certificate of Recognition by the Grey County Historical Society, and in 2018, the Ontario Historical Society presented him with the Carnacan Award for Outstanding Service to Ontario's heritage community. Richard Thomas seems to move easily between fiction and nonfiction writing. In his latest book, The Owen Sounders, Richard profiles people who made a difference in a series of biographical essays, all of whom were from Owen Sound. Please welcome Richard to the stage.
Well, thanks. Of course, I could have stood over there and listened to you talk about me all day long. So I'll keep it brief because I know it's a busy afternoon, lots of people waiting. I've chosen today to read from my fifth D.B. Murphy novel, Special to the Star. And just so you know, all of the books, the setting is real history and the plot is fictional. Though some people have approached me saying they knew exactly the event that I was writing about in Owen Sound's history. In 1918, the then famous Canadian bank robber Red Ryan was arrested in Owen Sound following a daytime gunfight in downtown Owen Sound, and he was sentenced to his first stint at the Kingston Penitentiary. And as they dragged him kicking and screaming from the courtroom, he vowed he would come back and have his revenge on anybody that was involved in his arrest. Well, in 1923, Red Ryan was the first man to ever break out of the Kingston Penitentiary. And he disappeared for a little while, but guess what? Fictionally, he came back to Owen Sound. And the Toronto Star sent one of its reporters to cover the story. So I'll just pick up and read you a short passage where my detective D.B. Murphy has been cold-cocked in a bank robbery earlier that day and is just recovering in his office when the reporter from the Toronto Star shows up. I pulled my gun out and checked its load. I'm not obsessive, but when somebody else has handled your gun, it's always good to check it before your life depends on it. A fine weapon, a voice said from the doorway. I looked up and appraised the speaker. He was a fellow of medium height with black hair and a mustache. His dark eyes sparkled and he exuded good health. But when he stepped into the room, the illusion was shattered by the cane he used to counter a dramatic limp. His clothes were of excellent quality and marked him not only as an out-of-towner, but also quite possibly from out of country. It's gotten me out of a couple of scrapes, I replied, peering over his shoulder to see whether any of my boys knew a complete stranger had violated my inner sanctum. Your man at the front told me to come back, the good-looking fellow with a limp. And you are? Forgive me, he said, hobbling right up to the desk. I'm a reporter for the Toronto Star. Hemingway is my name, Ernest Hemingway. Never heard of you, I said truthfully. I've only been in Toronto for a week. Before that, I was in Europe. Wow, I said, so you hear about the bank robbery? Robbery? This morning, right after the telegraph office blew up. The telegraph office blew up? First thing this morning. Hemingway looked like he might faint. Hindmarsh will have my skin for this, he said, sinking into one of the chairs in front of my desk. Hindmarsh? The jackal who calls himself my editor. A veritable hyena of a human being who feeds off the carrion of his reporters. Want to borrow this? I offered him the Colt butt first. Ha, he laughed, no thanks, but I could use a drink. That's what I'm really here for. I nodded and pulled a bottle out of my desk drawer. "This is for sipping, not guzzling," I said to him. "You're a gentleman, sir," he said, tipping the glass in my direction. He took a long sip, then set the empty glass back on my desk. "So are things always so exciting in Owen Sound?" he asked. "If so, I may have to move here. I bet the fishing is great, too." "No and yes are the answers to your questions. If it wasn't the robbery that brought you here, what was it?" "Red Ryan," he said. I smiled. "I guess I could have figured that out. What makes you think he's coming here?" "I don't think he's coming here. Hindmarsh has a hunch, and when Hindmarsh gets an idea, everybody jumps." He spat out his editor's name as though it were a curse. I wondered what kind of career journalism could be if the people who worked in it felt so antagonistic towards their employers. There might be a bit of biography in that line. "Why'd he send you?" "Because my wife is pregnant, that's why." "Pardon?" "Toronto has the best hospital in the world, and my wife wanted to have our baby here, so we moved from Paris. Since I arrived, Hindmarsh has treated me like the lowest rookie in the place." He paused long enough to pour himself another long sip of his whiskey. "So a couple of weeks ago, he sent me down to Kingston to cover the Red Ryan breakout. I read about that, but I didn't see your name on it." "Sure you did," he said with a wry smile. "It was right there. Special to the Star. That's me, all right. Special to the Star." And that's actually true, that part. For the first couple of years Hemingway was in Toronto writing, he never got a byline. He was always referred to as Special to the Star, as many correspondents for the newspaper are. He did, in life, cover the Red Ryan breakout from the Kingston pen. And in my research, I found that for the couple of weeks after the breakout, when Red Ryan disappeared, nobody knew where Hemingway or Red Ryan were located. So, of course, I had them both arrive in Owen Sound at the same time. And I had a little bit of fun with the story because I'm a Hemingway fan. And so as you read the book, if you read it carefully, you'll quickly understand that Hemingway, in fact, gets all of his ideas for his future books during his week in Owen Sound. Anyway, thanks very much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Next up, we have Winston Utenbogart. Returning to Canada from New York City in 1992, Winston and his wife settled in the hills of Headwaters, where in 2006 he retired to a career as a volunteer, woodcarver, graphic artist, and poet. Winston looks to evoke emotion and feelings in the reader, while his children's stories inform, challenge, and provide real-world experiences. He takes his inspiration from nature, people met, and places visited, while humorous ditties keep things real. To date, he has published 3 books of poetry and a children's book, which is available at the Grey Highlands Public Library. Please welcome Winston to the stage.
For me, poetry is a personal relationship between the writer and the reader. And I tend to think when I'm writing, mostly about what that relationship is and how you're, as if I'm sitting there talking to somebody. But and getting up and reading this stuff is a whole new area of expertise that I've had to work on. So I'm going to do my best to perform today. I have some poems here. The first one, this one goes back to when I was a young person. Move up, okay. It's called A Ballad of a Red, Red Rose. When first I kissed the lips of a red, red rose, I felt the rush, the sparks of youth unbound. When first I felt the touch of a red, red rose, I came to know the pleasures of life, all wrapped in silken boughs. When first I lay in the fronds of a red, red rose, I came to know the heat of lying in fields of sun and blue, blue skies. But when I felt the pierce of thorns and learned the heartbreak spilled by a red, red rose, I reached a place where time stands still, my dreams all lost. Now of an age I hold only the withered memory of a red, red rose. My dusty mind can only store the feelings, never to return for a red, red rose. My wife and I settled outside of Warrensville, and we just moved into town a few years ago. And this poem is an experience, is from that experience that we've now taken up new lifestyle. It's called This Place Called Home. It's a good old town, this place called home, a smallish cottage on a quiet street, a yard out back, and on the side a small love seat. Some trees, a spot for cabbages and such, some lawn to show some green around the place, just a little splash, not much. Our smallest shed takes up little space. There was a deck out back for the passing breeze. The quiet times we take with ease. The other night, resting on the deck, I stole the moon. There's been some, Canada's had some tough times in the last couple of years with COVID, and this is a white man's attempt to come to grips with residential schools and the Aboriginal folks that we have as friends. It's called Lost Voices, Lost Faces. Lost voices, lost faces, 1,000 found in unknown vacant places on not so sacred ground. No names, no faces, sweep it from the mind. Church and state conspired, took them from caring homes, family ways and tradition. And when torment grew beyond the body's ability to fight, they sought to return to home and family, sweep it from the mind. When successfully reaching home, they were hunted and found, taken back once more, yet again they tried to flee. Some never made it. Sweep it from the mind. From within the white man's fortress, forced education, sickness, and terror preyed on them. With broken bodies, many passed to the Creator. No friendly hand to comfort or lay each spirit softly to the ground. No names, no faces, sweep it from the mind. What thoughtless mind, what authority allowed this? What errant theology, what misguided teachings gave form and function to terrorizing of a people? Sweep it from the mind. Uncaring wendigos scooped them from family, the clan, their nation, a people well founded for 1,000 years. Sweep it from the mind. Often passing in the night, no parent at their side, tormented by a heavy hand and misguided logic, they were lost. No names, no faces. Sweep it from the mind. Now, some years on, a new generation has brought to light lost evidence of generations of choices never implemented with feeling. The hurt can never be erased. It cannot be swept from the mind. History shall not delete the harm, the enforced subjugation of a free people in this now defiled, iconic land. The time has come. A caring generation must stand to end the disrespect within a land of plenty. Respect the land, respect the people, first endowed by the Creator to be more. Reconcile and stand with human values, restore the promise. Never sweep it from the mind. This is add a little bit more brevity to things. My wife and I have a property up north, and we have some very good neighbors, and they're great friends, and they like to hold parties. So we take advantage of that when we're up there. And this one's called Tasty Morsels. Friends are always best sampled as you would drinking a draught or two. Remembered for the flavor, aroma, fulfilling the nature of the brew. Then, too, friends are also like tasty morsels of a stew. They are the savory concoction of our days, blended as like carrots mixed with peas, a few taters on the side. Thus the aroma and morsels blend, making a party night all the more joyous, because the friends are each special and unique. And the final poem I have for today is, I guess it's a bit of a love song. I'll be honest, I wrote it for my wife, and it's called Till the Last Time We Meet. As the daylight fades, as the snow drifts to ground, like the dreams of my mind swirling round and round, you will be my shining star, my anchor to the day. I'll be there, yes, I'll be there till the last time we meet. As we rest upon our quiet moments, as the time we have to tarry slips away, as the wind blows on misty days across the forest floor, as early morning and foggy dew drips over and on the greening grass, I'll be there, yes, I'll be there till the last time we meet. As my eyes forget to see, as my mind fades from day to lasting night, when my arms no longer move to any needed motion, when my legs no longer stride with strength, to when my feet no longer touch the sandy beach, I'll be there, yes, I'll be there, till the last time we meet. Thank you.
I feel like I need a minute after that. Thank you, Winston. Next up, we have author Sheila Balls. Sheila came to Grey Bruce as a young teacher, married, and raised 2 kids and a series of cats. Always she wrote, but aside from newspaper and magazine articles, did not begin publishing until 2003. When the Brucedale Press put out Somebody Move the Cat, her book of light, often humorous personal essays, Sheila followed this with a similar collection called Our Side of the Fence in 2005. The inspirational memoir, All Right So Far, has been a long time coming, but is the book she and husband Carl wanted out there, hoping other couples would identify. Set in the woods above beautiful Bass Lake, not far from Georgian Bay, it tells the story of how health and marriage issues nearly ran them off the rails and paints a picture of 2 ordinary people at a not-so-ordinary time in their life. Please welcome Sheila Balls to the stage.
Thank you. Out in the garden, I had placed an ornate white tin feeder bought before I understood the intricacies of feeding birds in the woods. I loved the feeder the minute I saw it and knew it could hang from the tall white hanger left over from my daughter's wedding. It would stand in the corner where we planted tulips last fall. Last fall, I had not understood the facts of life concerning tulip planting in the forest. As soon as there is disturbed earth, the bulbs are dug up in a great hurry, and that is the end of the tulips. Carl and I tried shaping chicken wire into protective cages with 5 bulbs inside each one, but even that experiment had very limited success. At the south end of our little cliff garden, the 5 surviving tulips bloomed. In mid-garden was 1 misshapen tulip leaf. Could they have grown down instead of up? I was bent over examining the single tulip which had come up at the north end beside the new feeder when all hell broke loose above my head. Inside the tin lantern feeder is a tall glass tube with a gap at the top maybe 1 inch high. Apparently, a chipmunk can fit through an 1-inch-high gap. While I recovered my presence of mind, I watched the flattened furry face press against the tube. I could imagine him crying, "Let me out of here." That episode was just a beginning. Soon, the striped bandit learned to wrap both paws around the metal hanger and shinny up it like a tiny firefighter going the wrong direction. Not much chance of seed surviving here. I'm sorry, birds, I don't have a lot of choices. But if I lost patience with my woodland visitors, I could seek out human company, better behaved and sometimes just as entertaining. One Friday morning, I went into town to see my aunt and uncle who were visiting my mom from North Bay. "It's so nice of you to come all the way into town to see us," said Uncle Dave. But who wouldn't drive all the way into town to see Uncle Dave's eyes light up when you enter the room? Besides, his remarkable memory for detail produces funny stories no one ought to miss. That day, he told me about the time he was playing in the Scottish pipe band up north. "We always hated those ladies' curling events," he began, "because some of the women would get hammered and then there was trouble." Uncle Dave explained how the band had been standing at attention on the curling rink when he felt something clutch at his ankle. Looking down, he discovered a lady. Well, he described her as a lady, I'm not so sure. Sliding along, sort of doing the backstroke and peering up the men's kilts. Now, I ask you, wouldn't you drive all the way to town to hear a story like that? Funnier than a chipmunk in a bird feeder. And perhaps I'll just read one more short one. One of my favorite places to drive was the road through the shallow lake swamp. In spring, you could pick pussy willows close to the road, although the ditches were deep enough that you had to have a very long arm or not mind getting your feet wet. A summer Saturday was the time to see large water birds. Just a year earlier, I had driven this road as I headed to the village to meet my friend Jean. To the north, a snowy egret stood knee-deep in water only a few yards from the road. My closest sighting ever, as they usually occupy the farthest reaches of the swamp. I slowed the car and got as good a look as I could and then continued down the road. A minute or two later, I came upon a large crowd of people milling around 15 or 20 parked cars. Bird watchers. What else would they be doing standing by the roadside on a sunny Saturday morning? Should I tell the bird watchers about the snowy egret or keep him a secret to show Jean on our way back? Jean, being a city girl, wouldn't get to see a snowy egret on the corner of Yonge and Bloor. On the other hand, the bird watchers cared enough about birds to give up their Saturday morning. I stopped the car. "If you're interested, I just passed a snowy egret a minute or two back," I told them. I rolled up the window and continued on my way, meeting Jean a few minutes later. I told her about the bird. I told her about the bird watchers. "Maybe it will still be there," I explained, "but with a crowd of people like that, it is likely moved somewhere a whole lot quieter." We approached the spot where I had seen the egret. Sure enough, a sizable cluster of cars lined the roadside. On the south shoulder of the road, throngs of bird enthusiasts jostled one another for a position. They held binoculars up to their eyes and strained forward eagerly. "Oh, look," exclaimed Jean, pointing over to the north side of the road, where a solitary white figure stood knee-deep in the swamp. As far as I could tell, from where he stood, he had a pretty good view of the crowd on the other side.
Thank you, Sheila. Up next is Kevin Land. Kevin Land has been writing and producing plays for over 40 years, with too many productions to name individually right now. He has taught playwriting to primary and secondary school students. He has worked with his wife, Mary Jo, who is a psychotherapist, as well as a distinguished writing team at McMaster University on a variety of projects with the themes of peace, healing, and coping with trauma. He continues to work on screenplays and look for new production ideas. He is also the owner of Speaking Volumes Books and Audios in Markdale. Please welcome Kevin Land to the stage.
Thank you, Jennifer. If you have any issues with what I'm about to read, you can blame it on my wife. She suggested that perhaps rather than mine some of my material prior to my moving to Grey County in 2012, I might mine instead what I've been doing since. So I'm going to pick 3 snippets from screenplays I've written since my arrival here. The first one is from a piece that's actually set, a screenplay that's had an interesting life. It began as a screenplay, then it became a 6-part limited series on the advice of my agent, and that met with equal lack of success. But don't sweat it. There'll be a novel next. So it's from a piece. It's set in Grey County, and the piece is called Minutia. And it's how it opens. Interior, exterior, various times of day and night. A series of 60 different images of timepieces pass by, each lasting a second. Some are on a wall, with or without second hand. Others on the wrists of men, women, or children. An hourglass is in there somewhere. So is a sundial. There are water clocks, candle clocks, stopwatches, cell phones, oscillating quartz crystals, and a swinging pendulum. Among the clocks shown is a cuckoo clock on the wall of the Minutia Irish pub, a deer-themed wall clock inside the Blake family homestead barn, a desktop clock from inside the Forest Glen Motel, and a mantel clock from the house where Nora lives. Mark, I don't trust seconds. Seconds lie. History is always measured in minutes. In a minute, everything changes. Much is given and much taken away over the course of a minute. Hope, deceit, longing, betrayal, the length of a sunset, the lure of a song, a snapshot of eternity. It is about the time it takes an 18-year-old girl to drown. The second piece is from a piece called, equally unproduced, although we're trying to get funding, called Maya. And I'm going to read you the opening again, and then a short bit from later on. Exterior, outside, on-hand auto parts. What you should probably know is that the character Todd is a recovered crack addict, and he owns an auto parts place in Hamilton. And he's been clean for 7 years. And the only hole in the only item remaining on his list of recovery is to reacquaint himself with his daughter, who's now 12. She was 5 at the time of the ultimate breakdown. So his goal in life is to reacquaint, to re-enter the life of his daughter, Maya. Exterior, outside, on-hand auto parts, East End, Hamilton. Early fall morning. Interior, downtown, Hamilton crack house, 8 years ago, night. Metal, twisted metal. Blackened, greasy, twisted metal. Some starting to rust. We are inside a labyrinth of light and shadow, wending our way to daylight. A phone is ringing somewhere, distorted and distant. As we work our way through the maze of metal, we cut back and forth to another time, another place. We begin a long ascension up a narrow stairwell, sidestepping wearied pilgrims with vacant eyes, sitting on the steps. They do not look up. Rather, they seem to be looking for the answer in the metal stair tread at their feet. At the top, there is a long hallway with a series of doors, some closed, some ajar. In the rooms, a variety of activities are occurring. Crack is being smoked. A fight has broken up. A couple copulate with an urgency that does not mask their disinterest. At the end of the hallway is a slightly open door that widens as we approach. We pull outside the darkened labyrinth to reveal a large, round heap of discarded auto parts in the sunlight behind the shop, a neglected tribute to found art. This is your brain on motor oil. Back in the past, we are now in the room, and a shaft of light from the hallway illuminates it slightly. In the corner by a window that catches the glare from the storefront signs below, a figure sits on a radiator, slightly hunched. As we approach him, he raises his head dispassionately to take us in. It is Todd, and there is no life within the dark circle surrounding his eyes. So we jump ahead a little bit. This is again very shortly after this. All you need to know is that Todd is trying his best to have access to his daughter, who lives with his wife and her new stepfather in Saskatchewan. And he's had a terribly bad day at work, and nothing has gone right, and now he's heading home. And this will tell you the reason for Maya, the reason for his pursuit in this story. Exterior, gas station, Hamilton Mountain, early evening. Todd pulls into a service station, gets out of his car, and begins to fill it. Frustrated by the day's events and his ex-wife's refusal to let him see his daughter, he stares off in the distance as the tank fills. Mounted on the next pillar is a TV monitor detailing news, weather, and sports. He stares at it blankly. And while he does, the face of a young girl comes onto the screen. Under the word missing, the image of a young girl stares back at him, born the same year as Maya. Although the eyes are smiling, there is something melancholic in them. The name under the photo reads, Dallas. 2 rows over, there is a van being filled up, its unseen driver blocked by a pillar. In the back seat of the van, there is a young girl, her head downcast as though reading. Slowly, she raises her head and turns towards Todd. She meets his eyes, staring at him briefly. Then she mouths a silent plea. Puzzled, Todd stares at her in some confusion, realizing it is Dallas, the girl from the image on the monitor. Suddenly, she cries out in a silent shriek. Her face becomes terror-struck, and she claws at the window. Todd stops the pump and takes a step toward her. As he does, the van begins to pull away. After a momentary hesitation, he leaps forward and steps into the spot the van has vacated. It is too far for him to read clearly, but he notices a broken taillight on the driver's side. He stands at the pump briefly, wondering what he should do next, when he notices the receipt for the gas purchase fluttering slightly in the breeze. He tears it off. Interior gas station, Hamilton Mountain, early evening. Todd hurries in and approaches the cashier, a young woman in her late 20s. Todd, pump 7. Cashier, pump 7's already paid. Your pump 1, $61. Todd, yes. He reaches for his wallet and gives her a credit card. Todd, there was a girl in a van at pump 7 in the back seat. I think she's in trouble. Cashier, that's usually what happens to girls who get into the back seat. Todd, can you tell me if you have a video surveillance here? Cashier, what do you think? Todd, if I didn't pay? Cashier, it's a little late for that. She prints the receipt and sets it out on the counter for a signature. Todd, the stuff on the monitors, where does it come from? Cashier, I don't know. The internet? A satellite? Our head office? It flies through the air. I'm not supposed to ask. Do you want a couple of bags of chips? They're on special. The last thing I'm going to read is a little cheerier. I wrote a play in 1992 called Heyday, which was based on a murder that took place in Hamilton. And it has 2 settings. 1909, when the murder took place, the murder of a young woman who was at home alone with her younger sister, and who later claimed that a tramp came to the door and shot her sister. It also takes place in 1970 5 in a California nursing home when the same woman is now in the process of dying, suffering from severe dementia. It's important to note that she was a vaudeville performer in her early years, and when she recounts the story of her life, it comes back as a vaudeville show. And what you have here is an incident of a scene in which a character named Roach, who's kind of a common man figure who runs through much of the play, an aspiring detective, and who has a scene with the chief inspector who's investigating, and Mrs. Hickey, a local resident who has come in to complain because of an incident that happened nearby on the day of the murder. I should say that there is a little innuendo in here, considering the environment we're reading in, but it doesn't go past innuendo. Exterior, police station, mid-March 1909, afternoon. It's important to know that when you're watching, the play was performed in 2006 in Hamilton, but this is an adaptation of the play to film, and it's of course, like the others, has not been done. An easel with title card reading "A Tramp Exposed" stands outside the office. Inside, Miller is seated at a desk reading a file when Roach enters. Roach is the common man. Roach: "Mrs. Hickey is here to see you, Detective Miller." Detective Miller: "Send her in." Constable Roach? Roach: "Yes, sir." Detective Miller: "Does the name Lawrence Bigger mean anything to you?" Roach: "No, sir. Who is he?" Detective Miller: "He's a transient whose methods aren't all that different from those Miss Kinraid describes. If we're to give the tramp theory any credence, Lawrence Bigger could be our man." Roach: "How's that?" Detective Miller: "He could have been in Hamilton at the time of the murder, judging from his last known whereabouts." Detective Miller: "The trouble is, I've never known him to kill before." "Never mind, send in Mrs. Hickey." Roach: "Yes, sir." Roach exits and a moment later escorts in Mrs. Hickey. Detective Miller: "A pleasure to see you again, Mrs. Hickey. Please be seated." Mrs. Hickey: "Thank you, Detective Miller." Roach begins to exit. Detective Miller: "You may stay, Roach. I want you to observe how we question witnesses. Now, Mrs. Hickey, you have some important information for us." Mrs. Hickey: "Why, yes. I don't know how I forgot. I was out walking on Bay Street the morning before the murder, and I observed a shabbily dressed gentleman peering at me through an iron-rung fence. He had a foolish grin on his face, and he was behaving in a lewd and shameful manner." Detective Miller: "May I ask how?" Mrs. Hickey: "Well, he was, I don't know how to put this, he exposed his person." Detective Miller, disgusted: "Dear me. Take over, Roach." Roach: "Sir?" Detective Miller: "Take over the questioning." Roach: "Me, sir?" Detective Miller: "You want to make detective, don't you?" Roach: "How long was it?" Mrs. Hickey: "I beg your pardon?" Roach: "How long was it that he did this?" Mrs. Hickey: "At least 10 minutes, maybe longer." Roach: "How do you know that?" Mrs. Hickey: "Because that's how long I stayed. I went back after lunch to see if he was still there, but he wasn't." Roach: "Where did this happen?" Mrs. Hickey: I can't recall which building it was." Roach: "You didn't recognize the joint?" Mrs. Hickey: "I told you, I never saw him before. He was so drunk he could hardly stand." Roach: "So he couldn't stay up." Mrs. Hickey: "He didn't seem to have any trouble with that." Detective Miller: "Sounds like Dirty Danny Durwood." Roach: "Wasn't he hung?" Mrs. Hickey: "He sure thought he was." Roach: "Do you think it was bigger?" Mrs. Hickey: "I prefer to give my late husband the benefit of the doubt." So as you can see, it's written in the style of a vaudeville routine. So if this were 1920, we would be doing just fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up, we have a local author from Meaford, Suzanne Raby. Suzanne has written one series, not yet complete, but so far she's written 3 books. They are adult fiction, The Flight of the Mayflower, Descent into Darkness, and Fires of Fury. Suzanne has also written 2 peer-reviewed articles published in the Canadian Military Journal and the Journal of Military, Veteran, and Family Health. Please welcome her to the stage.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everybody here today for coming out and listening to what we have to say. So I'd like to start off with a show of hands here. Who here likes Star Trek? Star Wars? Whoa. Do we have any fans of Dune? Dune. Yes, so just what do all those things have in common? They're all sci-fi, but they're also space opera. And my name, as I was introduced, is Suzanne Raby, and I am the author of Space Opera, a space opera series called The Chronicles of Deneb. And I have these glasses, and I don't need them. Isn't that amazing? I can actually see well enough. Oh, wow. Love it. That gives you away my age, right? So having said that, you know that I'm old, right? I need glasses. I spent 38 years in the Royal Canadian Air Force. I joined in 1980. I was in the first class of women that went through the Royal Military College of Canada. I retired in 2018 as a lieutenant colonel, and my last job, I was actually the deputy commander for all of recruiting for the Canadian Forces all across Canada. So it was a really busy time. And when I retired at the age of 56, I realized that I was going like 100 miles an hour, and I came to an abrupt stop, bang. And at that point in time, I was asked by some defense scientists that work with Directorate of Heritage and History, or History and Heritage, if I would be so interested in writing the articles that were discussed. So I realized I really liked researching, and I really liked writing. And I thought to myself, I've always enjoyed science fiction. I grew up with Captain Kirk, the original Captain Kirk, not the young, handsome one, but, you know, the guy who kissed all the green aliens and the first kiss with Uhuru and that. And I really enjoyed it, so I thought, you know, I'm going to write science fiction space opera. So the first book I wrote is The Flight of the Mayflower, and I started it in 2018. And it's set 60 years in the future, where everything that you can imagine that's plaguing our planet pleasantly is continuing into the future. So nothing has been done to address the problems of the modern world. But it is not an apocalyptic novel. It's far from it. Everyone here has heard of Noah's Ark. We've all read stories about Noah's Ark when we were children. And in this book, I'm using the same idea that the world is going to be saved by space arks, giant space arks, carrying tens of thousands of people to a colony on Mars. That's the intent, to reduce the population of the Earth so that the Earth can heal. However, that sounds like things might get back to normal, but it's far from the truth. Instead, I'm not going to talk about all the books, but what happens in the series, it deals with betrayal, it deals with conspiracies, it deals with wars, and it has some romance too, like there's light as well. It's not all dark, it's actually far from dark. So instead of talking too much about the books, because I'll give them away and there's a lot in there, I'd rather talk a little bit about the people behind the story. So my main character is a man named Dr. Daniel Radu, and doctor, PhD, not a medical doctor. He's an astronautical engineer, and he's the project manager for the space ark, Mayflower. And there's more than one space ark in the book, but this is the one that we're dealing with right now. He is happily married, wife, Poppy, little boy, 2-year-old, and he's got another one on the way. So his life is looking good, and he's in charge of a giant project undertaken by NASA, by the European Space Agency. And what I did in the future, because it's set in 2080, I merged Russia and China into one entity, and Roscosmos. That's the third space arks coming from there. So his second in command is a woman named Dr. Tara Kobor. She's married. She's got 2 teen kids, Luke and Isabella. And her husband, his name is Pallav. He is a no-nonsense, very dry man, security officer, who's in charge of security for NASA. Pallav himself is a 6'5" giant, big, burly, muscular guy. And he's about as dry as the summers in South Dakota, where he's from, Custer, South Dakota. He and Tara have been together since they were kids. Love of his life, and he would do anything for her, absolutely anything. Naturally, all space arcs need people to fly them, right? So the very best have been selected for this mission. I have Major Finn Vogel. He's a Top Gun ace. And his wife, Erica Rosendahl, she is a combat-hardened fighter pilot. They're the 2 fighter jockeys. They're the space arc jockeys that will be getting into the hot seat and getting the starship and the crew and the passengers safely to the colony. So there is a whole crew behind this, right? Because it's a giant space arc. There's doctors, there's nurses, there's dietitians, there's a hydroponics lab. You know, there's some stuff for the children, because it's not just about the crew, it's also their families too, who will be going on this delightful ride to Mars, except they will be facing the greatest challenges of their lives in the Chronicles of Deneb. They learn that nothing is as it seems. So you can kind of tell by looking at the cover of the book that they're going to be going through space, right? It's a space opera, space. And the next title in the book is Descent into Darkness. And this is where my military experience, I try to put it into play in this book here. And the last one is Fires of Fury. I wrote that I think it was published this past November. And a lot of it deals with history too. So if you read it, you'll notice parallels with our history and current times. So nothing is as it seems. They realize that they have to realize they're no longer at the top of the food chain. They are now become asylum seekers that have to adapt to a new way of life. It is a rocky road for some of them, while others, they just stay firm in their convictions, right? The stubborn types who don't want to adapt, who refuse to adapt. So all of my novels, they can be purchased either at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, at Kobo, at ridgecrestbooks.com is for ebooks, and also ask for them at your library or at your local bookstore. I don't know if I have time to read. Looking. I have a few minutes? Okay, I have a few minutes. Now I'll have to put my glasses on because this is small print here. So I'm going to read to you from The Flight of the Mayflower, and this is the scene where my chaps realize that they're not at the top of the food chain anymore. The Mayflower bucked and pitched violently as Finn frantically attempted to control the space ark from plunging groundward. Daniel and Pallav sprinted to the bridge. Skidding around corners and racing down long corridors, Daniel sensed Finn battling a force that surprisingly seemed to be overpowering the space ark. Pallav lagged behind as he tried to ignore the spinning sensation and nausea that stole through his being. That's Pallav, the 6'5" giant. He's nauseated by this. It's not fun. Screams and shouts of fear assailed the pair as they continued their race to the command center of the ship. Daniel could hear Rita yelling to her husband not to let go of little Lark, while her 5-year-old son, Toivu, howled in panic. Passing Barb Nolan's cabin, Pat's calm voice could be heard trying to reassure his mother and younger sister. Hey, it's just a few bumps. It's like turbulence on a plane. We're perfectly safe. Daniel groaned. If only, he thought, spurring his legs faster in an attempt to reach the bridge, while Pallav bounced from one wall to the other, unable to maintain his balance. Finally, lungs on fire, Daniel burst onto the bridge to be confronted with a sight that made his blood run cold. For the transparent skin of the Mayflower was covered with a net of gossamer thin filaments shimmering in the midday sun that seemed to be reeling the space ark in like a fish at the end of a line. Dr. Radu, thank God you're here. Not for one moment did Finn abandon the battle. Using the powerful fusion thrusters, the helmsman rocked the spacecraft back and forth in an attempt to break from the net that was pulling the ship to the planet. Exhaling sharply in frustration, Finn continued the gyrations with ever more increasing intensity, while sand and stones whipped in a giant vortex about the space ark. Feeling powerless, Daniel set himself down and with difficulty hooked into his security harness, while trying not to break the helmsman's concentration. "All hands," he shouted over the comm system. "Return to your quarters immediately and undertake security protocols." And I think I'll leave it there because I don't want to monopolize the time, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and I thank you very much for your time, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. And we have one more author before we get into the Grey County Reads. So our next author is Ursula Baker. Ursula left Poland for Canada in 1983, but never forgot her parents' stories of wartime Poland. During her many visits with the family, sitting around the dining table, she listened to their life stories, admiring their courage and zest for life. The images they portrayed stayed with her until the time she was ready to put them on paper. Much of her book, Shades of Betrayal, is based on real-time events involving her family, coupled with her meticulous research, particularly for lesser-known historical facts. Ursula lives with her husband in Thornbury, Ontario. Please welcome Ursula to the stage.
Hello, everybody. I speak with accent, so I will try to be as careful with my little presentation as possible. I immigrated from Poland and settled in Toronto, and later moved to Thornbury, Ontario, here. So again, my name is Ursula Baker, and really it's not my real name, it's my pen name. I love baking, so I thought instead of my sort of foreign last name, I would use the most simple name possible. And by the way, I love baking. When I was ready to retire, I took a course at George Brown College in Toronto, Baking 101. And then since then, I taught many friends in organized groups baking, and we do this in Clarksburg, which they have nice Mars Center, and then kitchen, and etc. So that's my name. Suzanne, just before me, mentioned 3 words: betrayal, conspiracy, war. And she was talking about her future, books in the future. But the same words can apply to my book, Shades of Betrayal, that talks about the past, about young people's lives prior and during World War II. So the book was inspired by my mother's wedding dress, made from a World War II parachute. So here are the 2 pictures, you may see, you may not, of her wedding dress in 1946. So my father, who served in the Polish underground during the war, that's his picture in destroyed Warsaw. He was receiving drops from England of weapons, medicine, money to fight the Nazis. And he saved one of the parachutes, and good for him, because that became my mom's wedding dress. And soon after the war, my mom estimated maybe 100 brides got married in this wedding dress because there was nothing available. So it went from, and there was explosion of weddings. So it went from one person to another, and eventually it disappeared. So we only have pictures. So That's the inspiration for the book. But the story about the wedding dress or the parachute is sort of, I'd say, interwoven into the story of my book. So it is inspired by my parents' lives prior and during the war, so it's a lot of true facts and their struggles. My father working or fighting in the underground, he was distributing newspapers, so twice a week he walked 20 kilometers to the underground printing center and at night, and always, we cannot even imagine, with a cyanide pill in his mouth in case he was captured. It was better to die right away than to be tortured and give away friends. So the idea for the cover of my book is based on like wartime newspaper. So so we know it was based on the wedding dress, the parachute, my father working in the underground, and that was just the two of them. So in order to make the story more interesting for everybody, and also it's historical fiction, I needed to add fictional characters. So I have young people in France, Germany, England, I would say. So Poland, France, Germany, England. One of the key players, I would say, in the war. Although we don't know, or people don't know that much about Poland, because once the war ended, Poland and other countries were part of the communist bloc and behind the Iron Curtain and basically forgotten by the rest of the world. So it's now there is more and more history coming that you may read here and there, but my book is a perfect sort of source of the history and lesser known facts of the history. So that's my parents, but to make it interesting, a friend of mine who immigrated with England with her parents, her father was serving in the Navy, her mom was in the Women's Auxiliary Services in England. So I talked to them, but the mom had a brooch that her father made from a burned down fighter plane. But they didn't know the story behind it. So it was enough that I had the brooch. I created two characters, Billy and Eloise, and their lives and, love and betrayal, to live up to my title, Shades of Betrayal, of course. And, but they are all intertwined, these characters. So even in England, Poland, France, Germany, like German soldier, and this is a true story, you don't know my mom, so you will not judge her, but she and the German soldier were in love, and that was extremely bad thing in Poland during the war. But I guess the 16-year-old heart does not really work as per the requirements or so. So the German soldier died at the end, but I gave him a different life, etc. So this story is in my book. The brooch story, I dedicated my book to the owner of this brooch story. She is 98 years old, and she just read the book in the summer, and she loved it because I talked to her, so I created the Eloise character in England a little bit based on her life and her service in the army, etc. So she loved it. And how do I connect everything also to France? Because my grandfather immigrated to France in 1927. That's his picture, if you can see, handsome guy. But he never came back. So he left my father at the age of 6 and his younger sister and mother to fend for themselves. So he left and disappeared. And I mean, we know what happened to him, and I gave him a new life, or so a story in France. So everybody, in a way, is connected through him. He's the oldest in the book. Mind you, oldest. He was 27 when he went to France, but the others were 16, 18, so they were much younger, the characters. So really, it's not a book about war. It's a book about young people during the war and how it affected them during the war in different parts of Europe. So it's quite, it's very personal to me, but it's also, it's the people and their zest for life, because as my Mom said, no matter how bad the war was, people wanted to hug even more and love even more because they didn't know tomorrow. So they had this maybe subdued but still deep desire for life. So the stories in my book are also talking about the changing borders before, after war, because the action in France is in Alsace, Northern Lorraine, which is historically sometimes Germany, sometimes France. So the people there really almost did not have loyalty to one or the other country because they were constantly back and forth. So the action is there, and that gives me a good canvas also for the conspiracy theories, maybe not theories, that's a more modern expression, but for the spying, etc. And the title is Shades of Betrayal, because really it starts with the big betrayal, the war, any war. Even right now, we are watching Ukraine, etc. It's a big betrayal by politicians, by generals of the ordinary people that just want to have a good, happy life. Then the other big betrayal is when at the end of the war, the Eastern Europe, as I said, was given to communism and Stalin, and Iron Curtain was created and we were forgotten. And it's only now that things are changing. And in between, there are the less significant betrayals, but they are personal betrayals. The father leaving his family, never coming back, the love of an enemy soldier, the betrayal of people's own ideals because they believed in something and war changed the way they look at the world. So I mean, I did not have the title to the last day before I needed to submit my manuscript to the publisher. So the betrayal was sort of in my mind. But what was clouding my mind was the wedding dress, because I wrote a short story titled Wedding Dress. So Polish people love cemeteries, and they love to visit their ancestry, etc. there, and put a little candle on the grave. So in Thornbury and Meaford, I like to walk through the cemetery. So I was walking in Thornbury and thinking, you read sometimes the names and this, and that inspires you as well. You think about their lives, what it could be. And then I was looking at one grave, and the sun came from behind me, and the trees cast shadows in front of me, or shadows, yeah. And then I thought, I have betrayal, and they are the shadows of the trees. And that came to me like this, Shades of Betrayal. So I ran home, put the title on, and sent the manuscript to the publisher. So, yes, basically, there are many things that you will learn in my book, but it's a story or multi-story connected together, but it's also a lot of history and the lesser-known facts. I was talking to some people. We know a lot about the pilots fighting during the war, and about Bletchley Park and Enigma and the movie that we all probably saw. But less is known about the pilots that flew stripped down airplanes, not even a parachute, nothing to save themselves, only just bare shell, enough fuel to get them to certain destination and back, because all the weight was in the cameras at the bottom of the plane. They would fly over the enemy lines and then come back to England. Immediately the black and white grainy pictures were developed and looked at by various Navy, infantry pilots to see how basically the front lines were changing. And women played a key role in this because they had very keen eyes. So they would look at the tiny details. And one of the things they discovered was the big German boat that was built, and it was known, Bismarck, and it was a destroyer, the biggest at that time. But an English young pilot flying over the fjords of Norway discovered it. So then they tracked every day the movement of Bismarck's boat, and then the English Navy and Air Force destroyed it in the Atlantic Ocean before it had opportunity to basically maybe change even the course of war. It was so there are stories and history facts like this. So if you are interested, I still have few books. The book is also available on Amazon, ebook, Chapters Indigo, Calls. So I know that Owen Sound has still few books. In Thornbury, in Jessica, Snook, I think I saw one more book that was left. And so it's available basically everywhere. In many stores in Toronto as well, but if you go on Chapters Indigo, they deliver to the store near you. So, yeah. Any questions? Or if not, thank you very much, everybody. I know I was speeding up towards the end, but I hope I was relatively clear. Thank you. And I'm sure I forgot.
Thank you very much, Ursula. Next up, we're going to play a quick video that kind of is a recap of last year's 2022 Grey County Reads contest. And then I'll come back to do a brief introduction, and we'll get into our defenders, who will talk about why their book is the best Canadian book selected in the contest this year. Thank you. Okay, let's get to it. The 2023 Grey County Reads Contest began on January 23rd with 7 participating libraries across Grey County. So how does this all work? Each library has a community champion whose responsibility it is to convince the public why their Canadian book of choice is the best. The community is encouraged to share their opinion and vote online until there is one title left. At the end of the contest, on April 9th, one community will win $200 worth of books for their library. I'm excited to introduce this year's titles and their defenders, 4 of which are here tonight. So I will welcome Samantha Parent to the stage, who is here to represent the Dundalk Public Library. Samantha is reading A Bird's Art Life by Kyle McClear. She's a part-time instructor and owner and lead photographer of Samantha Aaron Photography in Dundalk. Let's welcome Samantha to the stage.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Samantha Parent. I'm an artist, teacher, and photographer residing in Southgate. I'm also a mom of 2 small children. I chose the book Bird's Art Life simply because of how much I felt I craved the content the book was said to offer its readers. I wanted something honest, I wanted something real, I wanted something to help me connect more deeply to myself and the world around me. Bird's Art Life is a non-fiction memoir-style book written by Toronto-based author Kyle McClear, primarily known for her award-winning children's books. As the book begins, Kyle finds herself lacking inspiration as a writer, caretaking for her elderly sick father, and searching for a way to unplug from the pressure she puts on herself professionally in a highly demanding industry. To me, it seems like she is saying to herself, "I've made it, but what now?" Through her husband's work as a composer, she connects with a musician in the city who participates in bird watching as a way to navigate his depression. And intrigued, she decides to accompany him for a year. She documents all of her deep thoughts, life lessons, and bird sightings along the way, sharing her meditations with sincerity, whimsy, and humility about her own shortcomings. What she learns during her year of observing birds are many insightful lessons we can all glean from. I believe this book has something beautiful to offer a wide audience and was pleased to see it was well reviewed by critics. It offers very real inspiration and never feels like it crosses into the territory of being preachy or corny. The past few years gave us a forced opportunity to slow down our busy lives, not because of the absence of stress, like a vacation, but smack dab in the middle of a very stressful time for each of us personally and also around the world. Learning to find a sense of pause and calm in the midst of pressures and stressors of life is the focus of this book, and I chose it because it could not have come at a more appropriate time. As life seems to try to bounce back to an ever-increasing rushed pace as the pandemic comes to a close, I'm finding myself craving what the chicks call easy silence, or Taylor Swift refers to as sweet nothing. The places we find pause, rest, solace, and I don't think I'm alone in craving that. Kayo shares, I want for every overextended person in my life stretches of unclaimed time and solitude away from the tyranny of the clock, vast space to get bored and lost, waking dreams that take us beyond the calculated surface of things. In this book, Kayo explores growth through the slowness and steady reflection. She also explores the ways humans trap themselves into their routines due to fear of the unknown. In the book, love is not some grandiose act, but rather love is a walk in the woods. Love is comforting a child with a doll that has healing powers. Love is a son feeding his aging father's entirely frivolous aviary full of birds. Love is regretting not helping an injured bird. Love is taking your 84-year-old father to his medical appointments. Love is loyalty and dependability. Love can be found in the silence of company. The theme of grief is carried throughout the book due to the author anticipating the foreseen loss of her father. She writes about how it feels to expect to lose someone in the near future. This grief had a dampness. It did not drench or drown me, but it hung in the air like a pallid cloud, thinning but never entirely vanishing. It followed me wherever I went, and gradually I grew used to looking at the world through it. Her grief was rooted in anxiety, anticipating the worst before it happened. She talks about the habit of anxiety being a family trait, and she feels great guilt passing it to her children. Kayo draws the reader into how important nature is for human survival, to give hope in many forms. The book itself feels like a form of meditation, but the author also views her birding as a type of meditation and encourages the reader to learn the same practices for themselves that have helped her. When I'm feeling too squeezed on the ground, exhausted by everything in my care, I look for a little sky. There are always birds, she writes. Even though this book was written pre-pandemic, the wisdom Kyle McClear captured within relates to the lessons we were all forced to learn during lockdowns, when time slowed, when people paid attention to quieter, smaller things, like birds, while navigating larger, louder things like the ways of the world. The book even acknowledges how when hearing of terrible circumstances, how unfair and trivial it seems to pay attention and delight in the little joys of nature, such as bird watching. And then Kayo reminds us that perhaps it's often the delights of nature that can embolden the human spirit to endure through times of despair. The birds tell me it's all right to be belittled by the bigness of the world. There are some belittlements and diminishments that make you stronger, kinder. Birds Art Life is an honest, inspirational memoir that feels like coming home to the everyday nature that surrounds us, even in urban areas, in a way that feels so familiar yet fresh. Readers do not need to have a particular interest in bird watching to enjoy and learn from this book. It's full of honest reflections on slowing down from busyness, navigating or anticipating grief, and reconnecting to nature. It has something for everyone. The mental and physical health benefits that come from intentional, meditative slowness and spending times outdoors should never be underestimated. This book is a reminder that sometimes the small things in life can strengthen us to face the bigger things. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. And just to reiterate, Samantha is representing the Southgate Public Library with Birds Art Life by Kyle McClear. Next up, I will welcome Kimberly Love, who is championing All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Tays. Kimberly is an experienced marketing and communications professional and a veteran candidate of the Liberal Party of Canada. Kimberly is representing the Owen Sound Public Library. Please come to the stage.
Change my glasses before I come up. Okay, so my book is All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Taves. Publication date was 2014, so it also preceded the pandemic. So firstly, I think that you should read like all of the books, but I'll tell you why I think that this is a book that readers in Grey County should pick up in 2023. So quick summary of the book. It's often described, All My Puny Sorrows, as a book about suicide. But really, I think it's a love story about two sisters who grew up in a small, very conservative, semi-rural community. Sound familiar? We get flashbacks to their childhood, but the story centers on the girls as adults. We learn that their father committed suicide by stepping in front of a train. Their mother soldiers on, and she's part of the story. The rebellious older sister, Elfrida, who goes by Elf mostly, becomes a world-renowned concert pianist. She's brilliant, she's gifted, she's in a secure and loving relationship. She's successful by almost any measure. And she's also overwhelmed by sorrow, and she's absolutely determined that she wants to die. The younger sister, Yolandi, who tells this story in the first person, has a chaotic life. She's got two almost grown children, she's got too little money, and a very, very tangled love life. And Yoli desperately wants her sister to live, so that tension is really the foundation of the story. Yoli can't decide if loving her sister means that she must keep her alive at all costs or agree to help her end her life at a Swiss clinic, compassionately, and most importantly, not alone. She wanted to die, I wanted her to live, and we were enemies who loved each other. Kind of sums it up. At one point, Yoli's to-do list includes getting the car door fixed, picking up a shower curtain, signing her divorce papers, and Googling how to kill her sister. The book isn't overtly about suicide or death or loss, and strangely, it's not sad. It's actually a joyful book. And in places, it's very, very funny. Most of all, though, it's engaging. We see everything through Yoli. She's pinballing between the very mundane, the almost absurdist, and what should be high drama, but it's delivered in an almost deadpan way. And because it's an important detail, I should note that Taves acknowledges that the story is largely autobiographical. Her own father died of suicide by throwing himself under a train, and her older sister did the same thing in 2010 after struggling with depression for most of her life. The title, All My Puny Sorrows, is lifted from a poem by Coleridge about his dying sister, to whom he pours out all his puny sorrows. A teenage Elfrida uses AMPS, All My Puny Sorrows, to create her own insignia. She spray paints it like around the hometown, like on the water tower, on fences, and etc. The book is actually chock-a-block full of literary allusions. So why should Grey County read this book? I think partly because we'll all recognize familiar characters, familiar scenes. We can recognize also, I think, the friction between a traditional rural life and conservative values and a modern, global, multicultural society. Most of us who grew up here in Grey have experienced some of that tension. So this is partly a book about the where, and I think that this book resonates here at home. I also think that a good book will spark conversation. So this is a timely book for 2023, as we're struggling to right the ship after almost 3 years of pandemic. Without ever being overt, the book forces us to ask questions about mental health, about reverberating family trauma, about loss, about the nature of depression, and the right to die. So I chose the book partly because I'm mourning the loss of my own little sister, and I don't know if she wanted to die or not, but she did. Her loss came just before the pandemic set in, and so now I see these little losses everywhere, and with everyone. For 3 years, we've been held at a distance from people that we love, from communities that provide us with purpose in society, and we've been unable to either mourn or celebrate the lives lost, or at least not in any conventional way. I don't think I know anybody who is untouched by depression, either themselves or someone they love. And there are other issues, too, about the bonds that connect us, and those are also sharpened by a pandemic. We're in a great position to re-examine the meaning of family, of love, and even identity. Like, who are we? How do the stories that we carry and how do the stories that we repeat of our ancestors, our families, our communities, how do they shape who we are and how we approach the world? And one more why now. Taves acknowledges that her story is political in that she depicts a case where assisted suicide might have been a compassionate choice in a mental health case. Elf desperately wants Yoli to take her to Zurich, where she can die on her own terms, peacefully, and with her sister at her side. And without giving it away, that's not what happens. So we are right now at a moment in history where our federal government is trying to craft legislation on exactly this issue, designed to help people find a better path to death. So I think that a good book will entertain you, this is very funny, make you think, spark conversation, and stay with you after the last page. This book does that. It's funny, compelling, and profound. And that's why this should be the book to read in Grey in 2023.
Thank you, Kimberly. Next up, I would like to welcome Laura Duma to the stage, who is a member of the Hanover Public Library Board and who will be championing Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley on behalf of Hanover.
Good afternoon. So yes, Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley. She's having quite a moment right now. She's quite successful with her film, Women Talking. So we've got quite the competition with Miriam Taves going on there. She'll probably tell you to vote for her too. So this is a collection of personal essays. They're not laid out chronologically. Each interweave into each other into one story, reminding us of another. Her first essay, Alice Collapsing, is about her experience on the stage at Stratford Festival, dealing with a crippling case of stage fright. Her second, The Woman Who Stayed Silent, about her violent history with Gian Komeshi and her decision to stay silent during that #MeToo movement. The third essay, High Risk, is the most harrowing of the stories, dealing with her experiences of her first pregnancy and the birth of her eldest daughter, fraught with a multitude of physical disabilities and problems, spending most of the time in the hospital until her birth. Mad Genius Begins is the first story, which is her experiences of filming the Adventures of Baron Munchausen with Terry Gilliam of Monty Python fame when she is just 8 and 9 years old. It's a traumatizing experience, to say the least, and it's unbelievable to see the lack of supervision and the way children are worked in that industry. In Dissolving Boundaries, she speaks about her experiences in filming Road to Avonlea, for which we probably know her most commonly. For many years, she has avoided going to Prince Edward Island because it's a place where she has an experience of being treated like royalty. It wasn't even filmed in Prince Edward Island, but when she went there on a press run, they were following her everywhere. And so it's kind of a horrifying place for her. And when she's older, she has a dream that she and her daughter are walking along the beach, and she decides, we have to go, we have to do that, we have to do it the next day. And when she gets there, no one remembers her. She has this moment in the airport where she's afraid her children are drawing too much attention to them with their exuberance, but no one pays any attention to them. And they're just an ordinary family. And she can walk on the beach with her daughter, with no one following behind them. The final essay of the collection is where the title comes from, Run Towards the Danger. That was the whole reason I wanted to read this book. I just loved that expression and what turns out to be the prescription of running towards the danger to go through our suffering. And that's what she decides to do, why she decides to revisit all these different stories in her life. What happens in 2015 is she experiences a traumatic brain injury when a fire extinguisher falls on her head at the public pool. What horrifies me about this, too, is that nobody helps her, no ambulance is called, nobody walks her home. She's just sent out into the world to wander home and hopefully remember where it is. So she no longer has the energy to mother her young children, the concentration to do her job, and light, noise, and other people overwhelm her, and she has debilitating headaches. She becomes more and more fearful of going outside, and as many who suffer from chronic illness know, as the months and years drag by, their sympathy and their compassion wanes. She got all kinds of different advice, primarily, sleep is your friend. But it wasn't working out. She couldn't sleep her life away or the lives of her young children. On the recommendation of a friend who is able to recover from her traumatic brain injury, she consults Dr. Michael Collins, a doctor in Pittsburgh. His advice, run towards the danger. Don't focus on your symptoms, but start paying attention to your recovery and how to lengthen that. So ultimately, focusing on the positive. So his prescription, I'll quote from the book, I should now view my symptoms not as something to be avoided, but as opportunities to increase my threshold of tolerance. I must learn to run into the discomfort instead of away from it. In order to recover, I require daily exposure to anything that has traditionally triggered symptoms or caused me pain. My avoidance of the things that has bothered me has made it more and more difficult for my brain to cope with them. As she works through the exercises, pushes through the pain, doing the ordinary things of life, moments of clarity begin to happen. They pass, but they happen again and more often. They become longer. After 3.5 years of suffering, she recovers after 6 weeks of this program. People who did not know her before don't recognize her. This book comes 8 months after that. The honesty and clarity of Polly's writing doesn't make you feel like you know her as she recounts these events. They make you feel like they are her, experiencing them for yourself, becoming the eye of the story, and so unavoidably relatable. I personally share none of these experiences, and yet I know how she feels. Her joy and her pain, and I'm inspired by her courage. I find her likable in that she is unfailingly kind and generous, even to those who've hurt her, and her humor is gentle and ironic, not cruel and at the expense of others. The things I admire about her professional work, promoting the stories of women, championing their strengths, and validating their stories, are what I admire about her personality. Her film work as a director and a screenwriter is a reflection of her personality and what she values in life. What she reveals in this book is how that had developed over time, and moving into writing and directing allowed her to become that person where acting could not. The fatal flaw she reveals here is an inability to reach out for help and to isolate herself in her suffering, which is a flaw I think a lot of us share. This book touches on several current events. I find it very relevant, from the #MeToo movement, which I mentioned, to treatment for mental health and trauma, as even just traumatic brain injuries, which they talk about a lot, especially now with children in sport. It's become quite a contemporary subject. The coping strategies we can learn from this story is her resiliency, self-advocacy, and how we can move beyond our limits. In summary, writing these stories for Polly was therapy, giving her a place to save herself and her memories and emotions at different times in her life. The act of collecting and rewriting them for this book was a further work of remembering and self-exploration. Who was I, and who am I now? How are they similar and dissimilar? Ultimately, this is a story for herself that we are getting to share with her. I found this story inspiring because I believe in knowing yourself, and I admire her bravery in doing the difficult thing, in exploring some of the traumatic events of her past that shaped her into the person she is today. It is a quintessential female story, the prescription to run towards the danger she receives at a time of life when many of us feel the need to examine and perhaps embrace a change in our lives. When we read stories of adventure, of people who decided to climb Mount Everest or go on a pilgrimage, she's truly decided to do the truly dangerous and treacherous adventure of delving into her heart, her psyche, and her memory, places few of us choose to go. Grey County should read this book just to see that it can be done. The emotional and mental challenges can be overcome, and we can know ourselves and be the person we want to be, not just the one shaped by trauma and circumstance. Her final words in the book are the best summary and why you should read them. I know now that I will become weaker at what I avoid, that what I run towards will strengthen in me. I know to listen to my body, but not so much that I convince myself I can't do things or that I can't push myself. Not so much that I can use the concept of listening to my body as a weapon against my vitality. I do the highway drive I'm nervous about doing. I prepare to make a film, Women Talking, which seemed to work out well for her. I write the book I've always wanted to write. Run towards the danger is a way of being that I have taken into my life with me, a treasure, a spell, a sword, one we can also carry with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. We have one more defender this evening, but before we get to it, I just want to mention that afterward we will be doing door prizes, so don't go anywhere. Our next defender is Melanie Franklin, who will be defending Fight for History by Tim Cook. Melanie is a lawyer and workplace mediator who will be representing the town of Blue Mountains. Melanie, please come to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. The book I'm defending is The Fight for History by Tim Cook. Tim runs the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, and he's written many award-winning books. In about 2012, he was just finishing up the second volume of his account of the Canadians in World War II, when suddenly he realized he wasn't finished. There was something curious about Canadian Second World War history, and that was that Canadians, for the most part, in the years following the liberation of Europe, were quick to forget about what had happened there. Our returning veterans, for reasons we can understand, wanted to forget, wanted to get on with their lives. Canadians had lived through very difficult Depression years and saw progress, saw an opportunity to change lives, to build families and communities, and that's what they focused on. Meanwhile, our friends in the States with their Hollywood movies, the Winston Churchill, the former Prime Minister in Britain, they wrote, they acted, they cranked out all kinds of historical accounts of their own countries during that time. We did not. And it really only wasn't until the 1990s, the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, that we woke up to the contributions of so many Canadians. One statistic that I came across was that 1 in 3 Canadian men served in the war. That's incredible to think about, 1 in 3. In the 1990s, I think we were all minding our own business and probably turned on the television to see hundreds of thousands of Dutch lining the streets of their villages and towns and cities, waving Canadian flags in honor of our veterans. And in that particular year, a lot of veterans had gone back for the first time, and were starting to talk about their experiences with family and friends. So I think that just blew people away, and that was followed very quickly with the anniversary of D-Day and the same experiences in France when the veterans were returning for those memorials. So that's really what this book traverses, is how we came to forget, how we came to remember, and how we remade and came to understand that history that we should all really be proud of. Now, I love books. I love novels, but I picked a nonfiction book. It's the only nonfiction book on the roster to be voted on. And so it's really hard for me to say one book is better than another. How can that be? I mean, we all love books, as many as possible. So the question that I'm posing for you is not which book, but really which book now. And I say that because we're about to embark on the 80th anniversary. This summer, it will be the 80th anniversary of the invasion of Sicily by the Canadian forces. Next summer, it will be the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And I just think that anniversaries are a really easy and fun and interesting way to experience history, because we can sort of embody it, we can step into it in a way that, when you're sitting in school or just reading a book, it just doesn't hit you that way. So that's why I think this book is the clear winner this year, or should be, because I think by choosing it, we're going to raise people's awareness about this history at the perfect time, so that as these dates come forward in our calendars, we can think about what did those people experience. I saw in the news that a 102-year-old veteran just died in Owen Sound recently. We're losing all of those people, but we still have grandparents who lived during that time, who had parents who were alive during that time. there are people we can still talk to, and I think that's so important. I have a little book that I found in a bookstore about 20 years ago called A Time to Speak, and I just wanted to finish with this because it kind of exemplifies what I'm trying to convey here. It's about a man, Ernest Cool, from Owen Sound, who fought in the Second World War and never talked about it until the 90s. And then he started sharing stories with his daughter. She gave him a couple of audio cassette tapes, and he started dictating everything that he could remember, and she basically turned it into a book. So it's wonderful to be able to read not a general's account of something that's happened, but what it was like for a real person like you or I to embark on something so profound and so life-changing. People have mentioned, we've been through such an experience just the last few years. I think it's inspiring and reassuring to connect with this kind of history too, to be able to see how people made peace with it, how they moved on and lived their lives. So I'll just close by saying that this coming Thursday will be 80 years since this fellow, Ernest Cool, had his 22nd birthday. And he spent his 22nd birthday arriving on a ship to Inveraray, Scotland, having just signed up to fight in the war. And he went on from there to join the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment and to fight with a lot of other boys from Owen Sound. There's great stories about the boys of Owen Sound and what they did over there. So I just think, well, what if we could follow Ernest for the next couple of years and just see what he did, starting with next Thursday and imagining what that would be like, never having ever left Canada, having left his parents and doing something so different and so frightening and ultimately so life-changing. So, Grey County, please vote for the Fight for History. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Okay, well, this concludes our Grey County Reads portion of the event today. Ron and I are going to do some door prizes, but I do want to say some thank yous right before. I really want to thank everyone for coming out today to support local authors, local poets, libraries, literary everything in Grey County. I have to thank South Grey News for putting on this incredible event and keeping people engaged in literature every single year with the Grey County Reads contest. I have to thank Tim up at the top here for all of our audiovisual everything. Tim always saves the day with all of our events, and I definitely want to thank the team at the Annesley United Church for helping set up, clean up, make sure everyone's comfortable, and for putting on, events that really bring the community together. And finally, I do want to thank South Grey News for asking me to be the host of this event. I'm incredibly proud and thankful. So with all of that said, let's get to the exciting prizes. Okay, so this one is for a copy of The List of Chances by Christina Myers. And this goes to Karen Holt, who I actually know and work with at the municipality. So congratulations, Karen. Is it okay that I'm just saying names? Okay. Next up is another copy of the same book, and the winner is Heather O'Halloran. Congratulations, Heather. So the next prize is a copy of Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese, which is actually one of the titles in the 2023 Grey County Reads contest. I believe it is West Grey's title, but Lindsay Glazier couldn't be here today. The winner is Marianne Thomas. Congratulations, Marianne. And for another copy of Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese, the winner is Jan Moore. Congratulations, Jan. Okay, and so this door prize is for a beautiful Grey County Reads Bookfest mug with some coffee inside, and this goes to Colleen Bohr. Congratulations, Colleen. And the winner of a James Brown Song Within the Story, and correct me if I'm wrong, this isn't the James Brown we all think, Ron.
I feel good. No, it's not him.
And the winner is Peter McIlrath. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but I do know who Peter is. I saw him here earlier, so congratulations, Peter. The next prize is a copy of Gray with a Silver Lining, and the author of this book was the MC of last year's event, and she was also the Poet Laureate of Grey Highlands, so this is a very special prize. And the winner is Heather Spry. Congratulations, Heather. Okay, next up is the Markdale history book. We do sell this at the Grey Highlands Public Library, and it's The Crossroads of Grey. And the winner is Joan McDonnell. Congratulations, Joan.
I have one more prize to give away, and it's for our host tonight. Thank you, Jennifer. You've done a wonderful job, as I knew you would. I have a mug for you.
Thanks, Ron. Sorry for making you bend down there. Thank you very much. Is this the final prize, Ron? All right, that's it. And then the last thing, I know, last thing. I just want to say there are some really exciting upcoming events. The first is March 8th is actually International Women's Day. So the Grey Highlands Public Library and the South Grey Museum will be releasing a montage video of women that were nominated by the community. So make sure you watch our social media channels. There's also a primer on conversation authorities, and that is an event taking place at Kimberley Hall with the Saugeen Conservation Authority. We have... On March 31st, it's National Day of Trans Visibility, and Elizabeth Glenn Copeland, who was here today, will be reading an excerpt from her novella Jazz at the Grey Highlands Public Library. On April 1st, we have River Glenn coming back to do some song. He's a multi-instrumentalist and songwriter of folk pop music, and I believe that's happening here at the Annesley United Church. On April 19th, the library has partnered with the Annesley United Church for National Film Day, which is where we will be featuring a Canadian film to be announced. On May 4th, it's National Day of Prayer, which is a full day of service at the Annesley United Church. On May 7th, there's the Board of Education here at the Annesley United Church. And then finally, yes, the band? Yes, I'll let Ron speak to that.
The band is called Board of Education, but that's B-O-R-E-D, Board. On
May 7th. Okay, and that's it. Thank you again.